I was born and raised in New Jersey, East Coast.
Oh, okay.
Kind of spent my younger years there, and then went off to college, where I went to the Savannah College of Art and Design,
SCAD. That's what they call it,
and
right?
studied, yes, SCAD, exactly, and studied visual effects there, which kind of helped with a lot of construction work now, but obviously not the major I'm in and not the profession I'm in now.
So visual effects as
But
in computer generated visual effects for movies and TV?
correct, yeah, the
Oh,
trajectory would have been for me to move to Los Angeles, which I did, and work in the film industry there. So I
wow.
was specializing in what they call compositing. So it's like kind of not necessarily the visual effects part, not necessarily the actual 3D modeling part, but taking all of those components and kind of putting them together and packaging them to get them to look like a movie. Um,
Interesting.
but yeah, the hours, just kind of the workflow in movies is very stressful. It's either all on or all off.
Hmm.
And getting out of college, I was like, I don't know if I can do this, sit behind a computer for, 80 hours a week and kind of, going through finals. That last trip just kind of totally burnt me out. So by the time I got to Los Angeles, I was like, you know, I need to do this. You kind of that initial,
Hmm.
um, like I just spent 4 years. I'm paying a lot of money for this tuition. This is what I need to do, or at least try to do this. But found out very early on that like this was just not for me.
I
Well,
didn't realize. Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering, how did that come to your attention to decide to go and major in special effects? Like, were you a big movie buff? Like, what kind of like give you the click to go and do that?
No, believe it or not, I was never a huge movie buff. But I did really like, I have always loved art, and computers. So I kind of like it was like marrying the two things that I loved to do when I was young, which was, you know, figure out how to model things in computers and also how to be somewhat artistic
Hmm.
through that kind of course. And I had in high school really just tried to find every possible way to do as little real school work as possible and as much art work as possible. Um, and so, my last year in high school was like, man, it's way too long ago now. But my last year in high school, I was literally trying to only take art classes. And obviously there's like a math class here, but once you get that far along, it's mostly electives and took a lot of computer art classes,
Hmm.
and basic art classes, and just kind of knew at that point that I wanted to do something artistic. And this was kind of the path that was drawn out for me.
So how did you find that though? Because I feel like visual effects is pretty specific, and then compositing, is that what we called it, is also even more specific. So how do you go from in a broad interest, let's say in arts and computers, to then going to SCAD for that specific major or study? I guess it's a major.
Yeah, it's a major. That's a good question. I think the initial I want to go to SCAD was separate from the I want to be a visual effects slash compositing major. I think that's something that you kind of you learn through more years of schooling.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Um, I knew that I wanted to go into computer art just based off of kind of what I learned. I didn't know that I wanted to necessarily go into visual effects and even more so into compositing. I started to transition to visual effects and compositing probably the first year in college when you take, your basic level classes and you're like, oh yeah, this is kind of cool. Like this is even more interesting than, just doing a 3D rendering. I didn't enjoy the modeling aspect of 3D rendering through 3D Studio Max or, the multitude of different programs they have out there now.
Hmm.
But I did like the idea of putting the pieces together, someone else doing the artwork, someone else doing, the the backdrops or the screening, and someone else doing the video, and then trying to like stitch those pieces together was a lot of fun.
Interesting.
So spent a lot of time doing that kind of stuff.
Not to linger on this particular subject too long, but is that sort of like editing in a way? Because you have to take fragments of different things and put them in, and I would assume make them feel coherent.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Just, no different than like you kind of taking all of these bits and pieces of this two hour long conversation and chopping them up and shrinking it down into a 10-minute conversation. It's
Hmm.
very similar outside of the fact that we're using multitudes of different media through that process, right? So, the backdrop could be just a still image that is kind of stretched or distorted to fit the scene. And then you have someone on a green screen, and then you have 3D video or computer generated video. And then it's kind of stitching all of those pieces together.
Gotcha. I understand. So during school, you enjoyed it, and then you mentioned that last year got to be a little too crazy.
Yeah, I was doing a lot of stuff. So I was working full time. I was a
Oh,
rower in college, and then I
oh,
was also doing visual effects. And so I didn't have a lot of time. And visual effects is a very time consuming process. It's setting it up, it's letting it render. Those things take a long time. Rendering, especially back when I was going to college, took a really long time. Things would render or finalize a piece over the course of 15 hours.
yeah.
So there's a lot of stress, and then you wait this 15 hours and you find out that one thing was wrong, and then you have to go back and re-edit it and figure out what was wrong with it, and then re-submit. And like it's super stressful, especially when you're like, crap, the deadline's tomorrow, right? And you're sitting there, you've been up for 4 days straight. You try to keep yourself awake by like, we would run around the building, or like, oh, it's 4 a.m, it's time to go to row. So you'd like leave, you'd row, you come back, you'd check your edits, you check your renders, then you just keep going. It's like, get once graduating, you're like, oh my God, I got a breather for a minute. And you're like, now I got to go and do this for a job. I don't know about this.
It's so funny you say that because I think your stories of what you experience is super similar to what we experience and probably a lot of architecture students. I'm getting more specific. The rendering softwares they have now are just it's crazy. It's crazy, and it's crazy also because when we think back to when we were in school, that's what everyone would do. You'd hit render on V-Ray or whatever, and you'd wait overnight and pray to the gods of architecture that this thing was going to turn out, and then sometimes it didn't, and
Or
you'd
your
have to.
computer wouldn't crash in the middle of the night.
I know, and people
Exactly. Right.
borrowing other people's computers to double render and all these things. Now, with like Enscape specifically, you do it and it takes like a few seconds, and it's just as good as anything we produced to whatever 10, 15 years ago. But when I was in school, I was in the wind orchestras. I played an instrument, so I was always running back and forth between studio and that. And we had our rehearsals. We didn't do 4 a.m. workouts. So it was not nearly as insane as you, for sure. And it wasn't as physical, absolutely. But I remember we had our rehearsals twice a week, and it was from like 6 to 8 p.m., which is a terrible time. So you do studio from 1 to 6, run over to rehearsals until 8 p.m., eat like a slice of pizza, then come back to studio to hit that render button or whatever it was going to be. And I do think that the point of kind of burnout is something that's for sure a real thing in design and architecture schools during the senior year. And it's kind of a bummer because you graduate, like you said, and you're supposed to be, hitting the springboard off to your career, but sometimes it's more of I need like a long vacation break.
Yeah, totally. I've always been a bit of a workaholic, so
Mm.
I started working as young as 13 or whatever, like the legal age to work is. And so work has always been inherent in my life. It's like I'm just driven by work. So that was never the issue. It was just more so that like, this is a different type of work. This is sitting down in front of a computer.
Mhm.
Mm.
Am I going to be fulfilled with this in the end? And the answer ultimately was no. Like I realized that I've spent the last 4 years and a lot of money to go to this private college. But do I see myself doing this in 10 years? And the answer was no. I really look back and think, man, like I would do it all over again, even if I was given the opportunity. But I've learned
Really?
so much. Art school isn't just your major. There's so many other bits and pieces that kind of help bring it all together. It's actually gives me a lot of background knowledge to, what I do today.
Hmm.
Figuring things out, like building things, putting things together, trying to problem solve. You learn that through a ton of different courses that you take in art school. Yes, maybe you're not, art history isn't necessarily something I'd bring back to mind every day. But, there's a lot of art that kind of helps with what we're doing, what we're doing in building and construction. So, um, I, some of the electives in college that I took were some jewelry classes, some metal smithing, some forging, um, and I think ultimately maybe they don't necessarily drive every day what I'm doing, especially as it relates to running a business. But I think in terms of the artistic freedom, understanding what a designer's trying to think about or trying to design, but just can't come up with it, having that knowledge of those courses in college really did help kind of push to where we are today.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would you say the creative problem solving mindset was one of maybe the most important thing that you learned from that experience that carries over to other things, obviously what you do today?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, I've always been immersed in art. And so just learning, I'm always so curious, right? So like,
Mm.
I've always been interested in like figuring the things out, like sit there and watch YouTube videos on how to build a motorcycle or tinkering with a motorcycle. I grew up building log cabins. I don't think most like 14-year-olds are building log cabins in the middle of the woods, right? But like just the idea of doing all that stuff is always so interesting. And then, you know, then you're given this world of electives in college where you can literally pick from jewelry making to figure drawing, right? And just I love that aspect of going to college, I guess.
I think that's one of the advantages. Well, I don't know. At SCAD, did you have to do GE courses?
No.
Oh, that's kind of
Wow.
that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
But that's kind of interesting because a lot
Yeah.
of schools that where you don't have to do GE courses, they tend to be, I don't know if it's a lot, but I know some are very, very focused, so you don't get the access to all the things you mentioned, which I had always felt from my own experience that having the capacity, having the ability to take a range of different courses that are still creative in various ways is like incredibly helpful. I mean, like someone would say, like, why do you need to take, I don't know, sculpture or live drawing or whatever it is, and how would that affect architecture in our case? It's like it absolutely does. Like, it's not a direct relationship, but it like it absolutely does.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't necessarily know how to model in 3D like you guys might know how to do. But I think knowing the basic building blocks of how those things get created only helps you interact on a day to day in this industry.
Mm.
Um, I don't I don't necessarily know how to sculpt something, but I know the basic like genesis of how it gets done, and
Hmm.
I'm always curious about it. We got to go to um, names always take a lot out of me. So
I'm the same way.
Quarry House. Went to Quarry House the other day.
Oh,
Sorry, went to Quarry House the other day, and it's like that's fascinating to me. Like I don't necessarily want to sit there and you know cut stone all day, but just like what it takes to do that and to come out the other side with some of these most like amazing sculptures, staircases all made out of stone, and like that's always super fascinating to me.
so the jobs you were doing when you were a kid, were they mostly in building and construction and cabins and other things like that?
No. So my father was in construction, so that's kind of how I've picked up on this. For me, my father worked a 9 to 5 doing machining or tool making is what they would call it. Um, and then on the weekends, he would build homes. And
Huh.
my background in building homes really came from just my want to hang out with my father. And so I'd find myself every weekend working with my father, even as little as like 8 or 9, and he'd set me off. He'd be up on a roof tearing a roof off, and I'd be on the ground picking up all the shingles because he didn't believe in putting the dumpster next to the house. That's what he has kids for. And so like that was like my very early stages of construction in general was just wanting to spend time with my father. And through that, you learn a lot, you pick up a lot, you fall through a ceiling when trying to frame a house or something like that your first time.
Wait, no, really?
But then in small sense, right? You learn through some mistakes and stuff, but that's kind of like, that's how I cut my teeth in terms of the actual building aspect.
Gotcha.
In terms of what kind of jobs I actually picked up once I was able to work was mostly in computer art. So I worked for a graphic designer starting at 16. I was really good at computer art. So I worked for a graphic design firm all through high school, just to pave way. We lived in a rural town. There wasn't a lot of things to do. I loved sports, but I loved to, I had to buy a car. I wanted to be able to move around, and I had to pay for insurance in the vehicle and all that stuff. So working was more important to me at the time. And I had that career, the graphic design career through high school. When I got home on the summers after college, I would go back and work at this design firm. Again, mostly because that was the path originally I was kind of walking, which was this computer art path.
So when you finished school, then you end up going to LA. How long did you manage to stay in that? I think you might have mentioned already, but how long were you in that before you said this is definitely not going to be it?
Just about 6 months.
Okay. Well, that's better
long.
to figure it out sooner than later, like 100%.
Well, yeah. And so the way the film industry works is that movies are in cycles, right? And so people all get picked up for a movie cycle. And then what ends up happening is those cycles all end relatively at the same time. So
Really?
Most people in the film industry are on contract based, right? So once the contract is up on that film, they have to find a new studio house to work for or pick up another contract. Once that contract ended, I was like, thank God, like this is a perfect time. This is the perfect time for me to walk away and go find something that I love.
How was the change from going from, New Jersey, Savannah to LA? Like, was it a big,
it's a good one.
Have a big transition?
Yeah, it was a big transition. I think the amount of sun without rain is a big transition.
It's kind of weird, actually. Yeah.
It is weird. Los Angeles is a big city, but I grew up 40 minutes outside of New York City. So it's for me that it wasn't necessarily a bigger city. I think the way of life is a little bit slower in California than it is in New York, New Jersey area. So for me, I was like, oh, this is pretty easy. Like,
that's true. Yeah.
People are a little bit more chill. People are just like, it's just, the way of life is just a little bit slower. And I mean, if you've spent any time in New York, you'll understand like what I'm saying there is just the pace. Everyone's in a rush to get to somewhere else. And that's kind of my mentality has always been that. So it was kind of a nice change of pace, I guess you could say, to kind of enjoy the California living.
So then after those 6 months, what happens next?
After the 6 months, I decided to kind of like check out different areas. I went back to Georgia to kind of see if I wanted to just maybe stay there. I was not the summers. I don't know if you've spent any time in Georgia, but in the summer it's almost unbearable
because of the humidity.
And decided that was not the humidity, the heat. Yeah. It's 110 with 200% humidity. I don't know how it doesn't rain when it's that high, but somehow they don't have rain. But and so I had an opportunity to come to San Francisco and check out San Francisco, and I was like, this is amazing. It's foggy all the time. It's cold. I love cold weather. The city itself is beautiful, and just found a place, had an opportunity. I originally I moved to the East Bay, got a job in construction, putting bags on and being a carpenter again. And that was kind of fun. It came natural.
Wow, interesting. So brief stint in Georgia and then straight into construction working as a carpenter.
Correct. Yeah. And worked for 4 or 5 firms in San Francisco and in Marin over the course of like 5 years.
So during those
Um,
5 years, did
I
you
worked
I'm
for,
all, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, go for it.
I was just wondering, during those 5 years, I'm always curious, did you at that time, were you thinking like very consciously about what was going to be the long-term plan, whether or not you were going to stay in construction as, a foreseeable future, or were you thinking in the back of your mind, I'm going to start my own business in this industry? Or was it more like, I'm just enjoying this, so I'm just going to do this for now and see how it goes?
I think the first couple of years was definitely like, let me see how this goes. Like um, a carpenter in San Francisco makes okay money, makes decent money.
Hmm.
So it was nice to have some money in my pocket, but then definitely in the back of your mind, you're like, all right, so like I'm not getting any younger. I need to figure something out. Like I got to make sure I'm paying these bills and how can I do? And then I got brought on to do this. I was supposed to be brought on to do finish work on a high rise penthouse. And the foreman on that job site was like, what are you doing? What are you doing being a carpenter? Like you're way too talented. You're way too smart to be a carpenter the rest of your life. He's like, you should go get your license. And I'll like, in order to get a contractor's license in San Francisco, you need to have, or in California in general, you need to have a couple of people like sign off that you know what you're doing. He's like, I'll sign off on what you're doing.
Hmm.
Like, go get your license. And he was kind of the initial push to be like, okay, like maybe there is something else out there. Maybe this is what I want to do. I definitely enjoyed it. I was having so much fun, like being creative, and then seeing finished products was always so interesting. And then to know like these families are moving into this home and enjoying it for the rest of their lives, hopefully. Um, and so I went off, got a contractor's license, and was working for a GC for a little over a year as a subcontractor, trying to just get my feet
Mm-hmm.
under me, understand like how this world of business works. Because again, up until now, like I'm working for other people. Like
Yeah.
there's one thing to like work at a company. It's a whole nother thing to run a company. And there's a lot of aspects beyond swinging a hammer that like most carpenters and definitely for me growing up never had any awareness on, which is like running a company. And that was like a whole nother level of like interest for me at the time. I was like, man, like think of the endless possibilities and talking about, going to school and all the learning you're doing in college and in elementary school, like all of that knowledge. I love that education. And now I'm absorbing it like a fire hose,
Hmm.
trying not to make too many mistakes along the way. And there was a moment after a year of working for this GC, he kind of pulled me in and he was like, look, I'd really like for you to come work for me again, not as a subcontractor. And that was the pivotal moment at that time. I was just like, you know what? Like, I think I have all the fundamental building blocks and I really want to try this on my own. And we shook hands. I walked away. And that's really when Cook Construction was born.
Wow. And so what year was that?
2007, I believe.
Okay, so that's pretty good timing because, of course, what I'm thinking about is just 2007 and then 2008 happens. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so you start your own thing. Did you have projects and clients lined up when you transitioned out on your own?
I had a couple contacts, a couple interior designers, um, and just acquaintances you met along the way, right?
Hmm.
And so for me, it was me by myself. Um, again, bags on in the fields during the day, in the office at night,
Wow.
um, just trying to grin and bear it, and happen to land a really like sizable project that was way over my head at the time, but slight bit of fake it till you make it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And brought on 3 or 4 guys, and the designer that brought me on had full confidence in me, which is, I think, like how you really get a good start is you have a couple of core people that just really believe in your ability, regardless of whether you've had the experience.
Mm.
And the reason I say it was like way over my head is that, this was a 4,000 square foot Victorian home on Pacific Heights, or in Pacific Heights.
Hmm.
And it wasn't just like a carpentry. It was a full on excavation and adding a basement level
Oh
to
my.
a home. And I was
Oh
like,
God.
just like way in over my head. I've been on job sites that are like that, but I've never actually had to manage the
Yeah.
job site that's having that happen. And so, um, we talked about it. That's like 2007, 2008. We all know what kind of happened at that point. And I just happened to get this project when this happened. And that project really got construction through those rough years that everyone was experiencing. And I literally sat there like over the moon that I had this massive project to kind of carry me through that time.
Wow. Wow. So the project didn't go on hold or anything like that during those 3 years or so. That's amazing. I bet it was pretty easy to
No, yeah,
find people to help out because a lot of work just stopped. So people were probably super stoked if you approached them and said, "Hey, I have this job. I
yeah,
need help."
absolutely, yeah. And so one of the guys who I was working with at another firm, and we were good friends. He ended up coming and transitioning and working for me, and he actually still works for me today. So 15 years later,
Oh,
um, he's still with the firm. He's our director of production now, and we kind of cut our teeth learning all of it together. So it's really exciting.
so I do want to talk about that first project in the from the perspective of how you framed it, that's really important to find people who trust you and your capabilities, regardless of the experience, perhaps. Um, And I've always thought, I think for architects, it's a bit easier in a way to do different types of projects or to take on work that you haven't done precisely before. Um, because I think our architectural design background is fairly universal. I also think that, frankly, the liability is not nearly as high as you guys. I mean, we draw stuff and we have to know the codes, but there's a lot of checkpoints along that way of the 1 year of planning. And then during construction, if you have a contractor you trust, there's many people who do checks the work along the way. But if you're a builder, a contractor, I've always felt like it must be really difficult to break into either a new project type or a new scope of work you've never done before, because for most clients, more so than when they're looking at an architect, when they talk to contractors, they're like, just talk to me about your experience. I don't really care about your creativity so much. Like, talk to me about your actual project experience. So when you're doing that first project, that's a long way of asking, I suppose, like, were you incredibly nervous in taking it on, and how did it go?
Incredibly nervous. Yeah, I would think that sums it up accurately. Um, I'm never scared to take on something that's bigger than I am. I think that I've been able to prove through the years, even growing up, that you know an ounce of believing goes a ton in terms of being able to be successful. I wasn't going to let myself fail on this project. I knew what it meant to build this project, get it done properly, and kind of get through it. I learned immensely what not to do and what to do on that project in terms of interacting with certain key subcontractors. I think that's the other world
Hmm.
that we don't talk about, is that the support that the network that you build of your subcontractor base and the trust that you put into them is like extreme. You have to trust the people that you bring on, those subcontractors. And I feel like I was most successful at this project because I brought successful subcontractors on, people that have been doing it for many more years than I have. And then you lean on them for their knowledge. You get in the trenches with them. You understand what they're doing, not just that they're doing it, but you have to really like understand what they're doing, right? And learn how to be a concrete sub and the do's and don'ts. And you lean on their knowledge to help build a project. What you're trying to do as a GC is just coordinate all of the bits and pieces and make sure that they all communicate together, and that it happens, at the right stage and properly. And so making sure you have a key group of experienced subcontractors and almost friendships at that point really goes a long way.
For yourself specifically, or for general contractors in general, is there ever a case or a moment where, how do I put this, where like the subcontractors who have been doing their trade for, let's say, I don't know, 40 years, right? And they really know their stuff. Are they ever kind of annoyed when they're having to work with like a really young GC who's effectively the boss in a way and the one coordinating everything? Like people are like, oh, what is this young person doing, telling me what to do or coordinating? They don't know what they're doing. I've been doing this for 45 years. That kind of age gap when you're effectively a leader, but you're younger than everyone else.
They didn't never said it to my face. I'm sure they were thinking it. Like I said, most likely, yes. But I think that, again, you're not, I don't think you boss by bossing people around. I think you boss by understanding that they have a knowledge that you don't have. I think what I've proven is that I'm able to tell them I don't know when I don't know it. I'm not trying to fake it to them, but that they realize quickly that how much knowledge you're able to absorb and learn from them. And I think in a lot of ways, people that have been doing it 40 years are excited that someone's actually interested in what they're doing. I'm not telling them you did it wrong. I'm telling them, like, help me understand what we see here. Tell me, like, show me that this is correct. Like, we work through inspections, but there's a lot that can get missed in an inspection, and so just understanding and telling them that you don't know everything can go a long way. And being, what's the word? Like taking ownership over not knowing everything will help. Now, that's not necessarily the persona you're putting on when you're talking to a client, right? But that is the persona you would put on talking to a subcontractor that's been doing it for 40 years. The last thing you want is for them to think that you're trying to boss them around. Yeah,
that makes total sense. I think that the bossing by not bossing, I think is what you said, is a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also, like, we were actually talking about that last night when we were driving back. Like there is sometimes when you are younger, like maybe you feel like you don't know everything, like you don't know enough. But, if you think about like the type of projects that we will work on, they're each kind of different sets of rows and combinations and information. And it's not like every project is the same. Like every project still requires to figure it out in a way that has never been figured out before. So I think you're right about kind of owning the fact that you don't know everything, as long as you're game to figure it out and you put the time and effort into finding how to make it work. I think that's probably the best mentality that we could have in what we do.
Yeah.
Being able to absorb it, right? Yeah. So that the next time you're in that same situation, you've already you're building your experience, right? You're building your knowledge as you go. That gives you the opportunity to work with maybe working with people that haven't done it for as long as the 40-year-old, subcontractor. And that's where you start to build new relationships. And then you get the opportunity to kind of return the favor overall, like to up and coming subcontractors. And that's been exciting in the last couple of years, is being able to help even, employees that used to be part of Cook Construction, help them build their business and help educate them on the do's and don'ts. And, it's fun getting those phone calls at this point and being like, how do I do this? Or like, what do you think about this? Or even if they're like trying to get another job. Now we're talking about like interview processes or how to, like what to ask for. And that's kind of like the next wave is like you've gotten to a point where you really do know a lot of,
Hmm.
especially building in San Francisco. Um, and it's now you get to be the educator, which is kind of fun.
I was wondering actually. So you were working for a little bit in San Francisco before you started your business. Did at any point you were like, "Am I crazy to try and have a construction business in this city, which is, as you know, everybody knows, like not flat, not simple, like the houses are not really far apart from each other.
Yeah.
Like was that ever something that I don't know, kind of like give you cold feet or like you are not super sure about, or did that never actually come across as being an issue?
No, that never really came across as being an issue for me, particularly because when I really got into construction, I was doing it mostly here in the Bay Area and
Hmm.
in San Francisco. So in a lot of ways, I'll say it's all I ever knew.
Hmm.
Um, so it was no different to me. Like it's almost exciting, right? Like getting good at building in San Francisco proper really makes you capable of building anywhere else
Yeah.
Yeah.
super easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like people, clients will always ask like, what makes like what's the toughest part about a construction project? And I said, look, construction is pretty easy at this point, right? Construction itself is easy. Managing everything outside of the construction project is the
Yeah.
most challenging. Your neighbors, like the interactions with everybody around you, the parking, you know, the difficult sites are relatively easy once you've done them enough. But there's a level of everyone's on top of each other. The building projects in San Francisco are usually fairly significant, and so you're really having to manage more than the project itself. Is everyone being happy with the project as it goes along? Your
Mm,
neighbors. That's what makes San Francisco super challenging.
that's interesting, and that's a really good point. And there, yeah, I think that's true. I think it's also true when your, let's say, native experience or your first experiences is in a challenging place to begin with. Like you said, that's kind of all you ever know. And like we had a similar, we sometimes have a similar feeling because a lot of our experience was gained on the East Coast in New York City. Projects that were, in your case, Marina, like in Manhattan, projects in the Hamptons and projects international. But it was in whether or not it was in New York City proper or not, but it was that kind of environment, that working environment. And it's not totally fair, but it's a funny thing because like when you're doing CA on a mid-rise in Manhattan, when you do that, that's a pretty tough gig to do. And by comparison, a lot of things are not that difficult to do, not as crazy, frankly. And it's a sort of a helpful
Yeah,
experience to go through because at least the bar, I suppose you could say the bar in our minds is at a certain level and everything else becomes easier and from our frame of mindset. Um, but from outsiders, I think they maybe that's not as known. So their clients, I'd say, are very very concerned about whatever issue is. But for some reason, in the back of my mind, like I'm like, yeah, it's cake. It's a problem. Yes, it'll be solved. But like,
yeah,
don't worry about it. Like, there's been bigger problems before and bigger projects that we've seen and gone through. Like this, it'll be handled. Which is not always like the best
yeah,
way to handle that. Just say, yeah, just trust me, it'll be fine. But when you have that kind of background, it's sort of true. It's like, yeah, but it's not a tower. No one screwed up significantly. It'll be fixed.
So when you so
yeah. It's not leaning and
yeah.
falling over.
No,
We're
it's true. Like
fine.
the one in San Francisco. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty bad. I don't know what they're gonna do with that. The what is it, the Millennium Tower?
Millennial Tower.
Millennial.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I have no idea.
yeah.
But
That's
I will say, you're right. Like like working in San Francisco is similar, I guess, in terms of working in New York, where the bar's already set so high, and if that's where you start, it does somewhat feel e easier when you start to work outside of San Francisco.
Yeah.
We've definitely started to spread our wings. The I'm sure we can talk about this in length, but like the building, like just the building department alone in San Francisco is stressful in and of itself, right?
yeah,
Permits are taking forever,
yeah.
but but like building in San Francisco also is there's no parking. It's there's parking tickets all the time, or people getting towed, right?
Hmm.
So you then you we have this project up in Marin right now, and it's like the parking is endless. There's you pull up, it's a standalone home. Your neighbors are nowhere to be seen. Like
Yeah.
you kind of get up there and you're like, wow, it's like this is kind of fun. This is relaxing. It's sort of like moving to California for the first time and
Ah,
being
yeah.
like, wow, things are like a little bit slower paced here than New York City. You know, the bar that we've set has always been super high. That it actually makes it a little bit easier to kind of come down from that and understand that like no project is really all that challenging in and of itself.
Are most of the projects you do now, or I guess historically in the life of your business, have they been in San Francisco proper, or is they've been spread out outside of the city?
For the first probably 10 to 12 years, first 10 years, let's call it the first 10 years, we did 100% of our work in San Francisco.
Wow.
Wow.
We've only in the last 5 years, 6 years, really started to branch out beyond San Francisco proper, trying to move more towards the peninsula and move up towards Marin, um, because because it is challenging in San Francisco, and it is nice to have a little bit more flexibility and um, ease of construction environments. I think that most people see Cook Construction as a San Francisco based firm, which is great when you're trying to do San Francisco based work because it people really do think San Francisco is extremely hard to build in. And from an outside perspective, I can understand why they think that. But we this is what we've been doing
Hmm.
forever since we started. So for us, it's just work as usual.
Is it hard to kind of branch out to other areas if you like, is there anything as being local if you're a GC, or is it easier now maybe to get projects outside of maybe where you've been established?
Um, it just depends on the client. I think similar to a question you asked earlier, like most clients are saying like, show me work that you've done in this area. Like, show me you can
Right.
build here, you know?
Right.
Um, Show me that you know how to do this. And a lot of the time, it's a lot of education. Like, I understand that we've spent the last 10 years in San Francisco. This isn't the first home we've built in Menlo Park, or this isn't the first home. But sometimes you can't say that, right? And then how do you get to be able to say that is again, I think the relationships you've been able to build here in San Francisco, right?
Hmm.
Um, Working with designers or architects that have brought you on down there and say, look, like we haven't worked with them on a project down in Atherton yet, but they absolutely have the ability to build in Atherton. Um, a lot of the challenges of GC is your subcontractor base, right? You
Mm-hmm.
want to try to use as much local talent as you can. Um, what's great about San Francisco or the Bay Area in large is everyone's coming from like the workers are all coming from Vacaville
Yeah.
Yeah.
or Santa Rosa. Like so whether you're or San Jose for that matter, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the subcontractors are spread out just as far as our superintendents and project managers are at this point. So I think in large you can almost group the Bay Area together, but you have to get over that the client facing question of have you done work down here before. So once you can get past that, I think it's fairly easy.
So if you had a potential client approaching you to do a house in Montana,
That's a different
would
gig,
you?
though.
Well, I mean, it is, but you
That's
see more and more, like architects and contractors kind of working in different states because maybe the clients has several properties, or it's just happened that they really like you and they don't want to hire anyone else.
Oh, that's on the opposite end of the spectrum. If
Mm-hmm.
they just want to use you and they have full trust and they probably just don't want to spend time researching anyone else.
Yeah, and we just recently had that opportunity. We haven't gotten to the point of being in construction, but we have a client that we built a beautiful house for here in San Francisco. They had since sold it and they own three properties in Los Angeles. And so we've looked at the properties. He has a house that he's looking to have remodeled. It's a $10 million Hollywood Hills home. It's beautiful, overlooks all of downtown Los Angeles. But now it's as a GC, how do you work from afar?
Yeah.
And trying to understand like the best way to manipulate, because you do have to have boots on the ground as a GC. You do
Yeah.
have to have people that work for you, that are in the field, that have your best interest and the client's best interest in mind. You can't, we're not client reps.
Yeah.
We're not just looking at paperwork. We're actually building a home, right? And so um, that's like our newest challenge these days is trying to see how can we GC in Montana or in Los Angeles? What does that look like for us? And I don't know the answer to that yet,
That's exciting though. That's really cool.
but
I
it's
mean,
exciting.
certainly for us, and this, like we do work throughout California. That means Los Angeles, obviously, and San Francisco. But it's much easier for an architect, obviously, to do work in other places because the heavy lifting for us takes place mostly on a computer, and design meetings, which these days can be done remotely, and people are kind of accustomed to that more than anything else, if anything. But yeah, boots on the ground, that's a different thing. And even construction administration, which architects do, is a much lighter touch than having to be there every day, having a project manager or site super that has to be there every day watching over the project, if it's certainly of the scale that you guys do. I think, yeah, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, I think, one, having employees here that are willing and open to transitioning to living in Los Angeles or into wherever you're gonna set up shop.
Mm-hmm.
And then the possibility of employees that, San Francisco over the last 5 years has been really hard, one, to buy homes, and two, just to afford to live.
Yeah.
And so, if you've got good, solid employees, but they can't manage to stay here any longer, how do you keep them, retain them? And I think that's how, other companies have grown to other states, is they've got these great employees that they don't want to let go of, and they invest in them in other states.
Yeah.
And so that's some things we're looking at as well.
That's interesting. It makes sense. I think also the point you brought up about clients looking for that very specific local experience is an interesting one. And it's certainly something that we see. And I would imagine this kind of narrative applies to many other professions as well, where a project is local in a way. And so we certainly come across it too. It's like, have you done a project in this? Sometimes it's even hyper specific. Forget the peninsula. It's like, have you done a project in this particular city or this neighborhood on the street? It's like, no, but I have to work at my dialogue for my answer, but I'm like, no, but again, it's not a problem. And I think for you guys, I would imagine it's sort of similar, where if you're used to doing work, construction work in San Francisco, I mean, I would be able to say as an architect, look, if you have a contractor who does really successful high-end work in San Francisco and their houses, and you're trying to do a house in Atherton,
where it's flat,
it's going to be easy peasy for them. Like, they're going to be stoked to do it because it's Atherton and it's flat, man, and you got a lot of space. Like, they're going to do a hell of a job for you because they're used to dealing with, like, as you said, all the peripheral stuff, that happens in a city, the logistics of construction, not even the construction itself, not even hammering, but like the parking and the tickets and the setting and all of those things that you don't have as much in a lot of these other places. And so I don't know. I think from an insider's perspective, it's like, absolutely, that contractor can do it. Like, they might even do a better job because they're used to working at an efficiency level and being organized at a level that's like perhaps even higher, because you have to be that way if you're dealing with
Absolutely.
some of these crazy slope streets in the city.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that just the knowledge we have on like structural and architectural, right? Once you see that here in San Francisco, it only gets easier as you start to get to a flatter home. The methods are all the same. The technology is the same. You're just applying it to a simpler plot of land.
Right.
There's been some interesting projects that I'm like, okay, well, I haven't ever done a completely off the grid house. We looked at a project, a couple of years ago where the client was adamant that they wanted the entire property off the grid, not connected to electric, all solar. But it was challenging, right? They're looking for they were particularly looking for someone who had done it before, because I'm sure there are challenges in building a completely off the grid home that I'm not aware of. There's not even a lot of solar companies that are willing to do a completely off the grid. They call them off the grid, but there's still a connection to, PG&E in some way or another.
Right.
So there's always like more new and exciting challenges, and then just again, kind of going back to like being able to educate the client that like, yes, I might not know everything that there is to do with off the grid building, but I know a lot about how to build, that I'm sure we could figure this out.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of gets to a point which you might have brought up directly earlier, is at some level, in terms of client contractor or client architect relationship, if it's not a good fit, it's kind of not a good fit. Like, at least that's what I found is we do a lot of effort to educate folks, not overwhelm them, because it's not their, I don't expect them to become like a professional architect afterwards or to understand all the ins and outs, but to educate them so they can make informed decisions regardless of who they decide to work with. And if in the end they still feel like, I just want to work with someone who has what you don't have, then that's kind of what it is. And if you go that way, then I go this way. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the relationship through a construction project. If you have to feel comfortable as a client hiring the GC, right? You have to feel comfortable that that person is going to align with the things that you want, because at the end of the day, this is a very emotional process, right?
Yeah.
This isn't building a high rise. There's actual emotions with this, with what we do. We're building someone's home. They're going to live in this home. This isn't development. This is their livelihood. There is a lot of emotions. It's so funny because clients, even before getting hired, they'll be like, what is like what are the biggest unknowns? And I said that, like, one of the biggest unknowns is your emotional attachment to the spaces as we build. That's how you want to talk about the biggest changes in costs, is when a client walks into a home and they want to, they see it and they feel it and they're like, this isn't what I was expecting. I think
oh no, in a good way or a bad way?
Usually in a good way, right? Or a bad way if you want to take it as a bad way, right? Like, just this, it was built, or it's starting to build, it's starting to take shape. They get into the home and they're like, you know what? Like, I really wish that wall wasn't there. Like, now that I'm seeing it in real life, I really wish, like, it didn't bother me on paper, or I didn't see it, right? Now I really wish it was this other way,
Yeah.
And just to go back a little bit, is that I think having a solid team that you trust is probably more important, and a solid team that works well together, that can communicate and collaborate, I think, is the most important for like a successful residential construction project.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
Do you have like things that you're looking for in a client before you decide to, yes, I'm gonna do this job? Like, I don't know, does the client has to have certain qualities that for you it's kind of key for them to have, otherwise you won't
That's
do
a good
it?
point, because sorry to interrupt, but the other side of all of this, of course, is that for the professionals, it's still, we're engaged, and as emotionally engaged, maybe not quite as much, but sometimes as much or more as the client. And I think all of us we do have to choose to work with the client, the people we want to work with at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, I think the most important quality, I want a client that's engaged with the process. I want them to be excited about what we're doing, what we're building. I always say, they don't have to make decisions; they get to make decisions, and that's a huge difference. Is that they want to make these decisions as opposed to having to make these decisions. If you go through the entire project like, oh, I have to make this decision now. I have to make this decision. It's like a completely different mindset as to like, oh my God, like, I'm so excited about getting to make these decisions. I have the opportunity to make these decisions. I think is really important in a client. We've obviously worked. Not every client is the perfect client.
Yeah.
We definitely have had both sides of the coin, but I will tell you, like in interviewing, getting an understanding of who the client is, that they're getting to make these decisions, that they are enjoying this process, will only make the entire process more enjoyable and fun. I want to have fun. I want to, you know, cheers at the end of the project and be invited back for the barbecue. Like that's my ultimate goal.
That's a great way of putting it. The having versus getting to. I've never thought of it quite that distinctly from that mindset, but it makes total sense too. The energy needs to be there, because you don't want someone who's bummed out or not interested, because it's a really odd thing. Like maybe for outsiders, they might think, well, if you get paid what you want and the project turns out good, then what else do you care? But these projects take so long, and like I said, the professionals, we become so emotionally attached ourselves that it's not satisfying if in the end the person just doesn't give a shit, or their relationship doesn't go well, or I don't know, whatever it else might be.
I mean, like, let's face it, like this is a lot of your time, this is a lot of our time, and this is a lot of their time to just start out with nothing and build an entire home that this person's going to move into, right? Like the last thing we want is for someone to not even care what the outcome of that home is,
Yeah.
Or in some sense, like just want it to get done. I think
Right.
that it's far more satisfying, I'm sure for you guys as well, like when a client is engaged and is excited about like the end result, right? That like it's not purely about money. Obviously there's always a cost factor in building any home, but that they enjoy the design element and the pieces that make a home unique. We get to build a lot of unique homes in San Francisco, and it's fun when it's the most rewarding when that client is interacting and enjoying that process.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Do you have like a favorite project that you've worked on, like the one that kind of like is like a bit special compared to others?
We did a project for John Maniscalco years ago. That I really have fallen in love with modern architecture, so that's always my drive in terms. I think that there's something to be said about the level of detail that you put into making it look so simple, right?
Yeah.
So sleek but like the tolerances the tolerances that you have to work with in order to really pull off a good modern home. I love that challenge. There's a challenge to that, and um, you know, I say you don't hide it behind a three-piece crown, because there's no crown, right? You're not like that. Is what I think drives me is for modern home is it's all about the technical skills as a contractor to pull it off. So I'm always excited when we get an opportunity to do that.
I'm glad you said that, because I feel like a lot of people, potential clients, and people who are not in our industry are like, oh well, it's simple. It's just a white wall and
It's just clean
there's
lines.
no base, and that's that.
It's clean lines that span 50 feet and line up perfectly.
Yeah, it's just that.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say that from a mass modeling standpoint, it's very easy for us to do that in the computer.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of building in San Francisco is remodels too, right? So you do these ultra modern remodels on homes that were most likely not modern to begin with. So you're dealing with 100-year-old homes that have settled, that are not perfectly plumb and level, and you're trying to figure out with structural engineers and architects how to make this home perfect. Right? In many ways, you're trying to make a perfect home out of a home that is far from perfect. And there's a lot of collaboration there between all parties in terms of, in order to get it to the point where you're finished and you're like, this is perfect.
So that's an interesting subject, because we had just done a recording, which I think will probably come out before this one, about remodels and how remodels are different from new construction and other things on that kind of topic. But and that was a conversation which the two of us, two architects. So, but from your perspective as a builder, what are the differences or challenges between a remodel project versus new construction? Is one harder, easier, more nuanced, or what are the nuances?
By far, I would say that a remodel is more challenging to execute well or properly. I think that the hardest part about a remodel project is that you are dealing with existing site conditions, and I think that's what everyone gets so scared of. But like in terms of cost changes, right? Is that what don't we know, right? There's a lot of unknown going into a project. And I think the challenge it's just far more challenging when you're not given all of the reality up front of what you're dealing with. It's a lot easier to go in and say, okay, well, this is an empty plot of land. And yes, you might run into some hard bedrock or no bedrock at all and have to pivot on what you're doing, but you're creating from scratch the scenario that's going to kind of resonate through the entire home, right? So it's not, if there's an issue, you've caused the issue. You're not having to
right.
solve for an issue that's already there. And in a lot of ways that makes it easier to build, a new construction home. Now, we're currently on a new construction home in San Francisco, and I will say there's definitely some outside factors that you have to deal with, especially because we're lot line to lot line, and then you're still dealing with some of those what I'll call remodel factors with neighbors that make it challenging. But I think as the foundation gets built and the superstructure starts to get constructed, you've figured everything out in terms of the big question marks, and now you're really just trying to stay within your tolerances of acceptable build, right? We've got engineered lumber now that's perfectly straight. A lot of the interior framing now is all engineered at 2x as opposed to standard Doug fir and that kind of stuff. So you get to really control your environment far so more than you would on a remodel project.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's interesting that there's always going to be existing conditions you have to work with, but in a new construction, the number of existing conditions are less. They're not necessarily less significant, like they're being bedrock or not bedrock, or having to underpin the neighbor's foundations if their house is, you tear down yours and you realize, oh wow, their foundation's crap. We have to fix theirs. But it's kind of like once you solve those things, basically earlier on in the construction process, like that, then you're set. And then the rest, like you said, is if there's a problem, it's because someone messed up on what you did. I think the thing with remodels, just echoing what you already commented, is that it's not just that there's existing conditions; it's that those conditions are only revealing themselves throughout the project, which is like a weird thing. So, like from an architect's perspective, for a new house, you do the drawings and the house starts to get built, and then you perform construction administration. There's always surprises and problems, yes, but you kind of know you've plotted out the planning. You know what the trajectory you're going to go. With a remodel, it's like you have to. It's almost like the mentality changes because you're just the planning and designing. You expect to continue throughout in a certain way, or at least the heavy collaboration, like you mentioned, between the engineer, contractor, interior designer, let's say, and architect, is going to continue much more heavily throughout than would typically take place in a new home. And it's a different thing, actually.
Yeah, and like you kind of like it's unfolding throughout the project, right? The architect, isn't starting off with a perfect set of drawings. They're not starting off with a perfect house, right? You get I'm sure you've encountered where like you get as built for this home, and then you do a lot of work modeling this home, getting it all set up. As soon as this home goes through demo, you realize there's a ton of errors, not just to mention like floors maybe being out of level, but like walls not being in the spots that they were originally kind of modeled to.
Yeah.
and having to pivot, and you're finding these things all along the way throughout the process, whether you're doing a mass excavation project on a remodel home, you're just trying to lay out floors and floors are out of plumbing level, or like the walls literally aren't as wide or the rooms aren't as big as you anticipated them to be, and having to like continually work to tighten all of those things up along the way. Far harder than, you know, having a survey guy come out and plot where the corner of your new foundation's going to go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Blank white paper space is what I want. But yeah, no, it's absolutely true what you're saying. So are most of the projects you guys do houses, or you also do a little bit of commercial work?
We've done commercial work in the past, but we primarily focus on single family residential.
Gotcha. And so this is kind of background information about your business. So how many people do you have in-house? How many projects do you have going on? Give us kind of a sense of the operation.
Sure. We're a relatively small firm. We've got 20 employees. Most of these employees are superintendents, project managers. We really focus on the management of the GC part as opposed to self-performing a ton of the work.
Mm-hmm.
We do have some very, very skilled carpenters on our staff, and they will do windows and doors, or they will install cabinetry, but primarily they're there to kind of make sure that when a project is wrapping, that the punch list goes smoothly, that the like the details that we kind of hold ourselves to are met. So they're there really to kind of manage that piece. In terms of projects, we do between 6 and 8 projects at a time. I would say
mm-hmm.
it might be 10 if we're trying to wrap up 2, but ideally there's typically about 6 to 8 in different various stages of construction.
Gotcha.
Is there a phase of construction that you personally prefer more than others? Like, I really like demo.
Who doesn't like demo?
Yeah, I like demo. I like demo,
drywall.
you know.
I love
drywall. It's super specific.
Honestly, I think like right when insulation goes in, because I think at that moment it's before drywall, so it's not super messy. Like homeowners will walk into a space when it's being built and it's still a construction site. And then there's our insulation gets put in all the walls and the space kind of closes in on you. Things
Mm-hmm.
become super quiet. The house feels like a house all of
Mm-hmm.
a sudden.
Hmm.
That moment is super awesome, because up until that moment, you're seeing from one end of the house to the other through 2x4 walls and
Right.
so on and so forth. And then all of a sudden, not only is it like the walls are non-transparent, but they then kind of close in on you. Like, wow, it's so quiet in here. It's a home. And I think, and then you gotta go into all of the finishes, and that's exciting. That all of that is exciting to see come together. But there's just that one moment where everything kind of like comes to a point, and really the house turns into a home, and super exciting for me.
That's interesting. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's
because you're right. Like, I think it also, especially with remodels, when demolition occurs, clients are pretty shocked. I've never seen a client not be shocked when they step on site and they're like, "Holy shit!"
Yeah, we always warn clients when they come to see demo. We're like, "Okay, don't be scared. It might look really scary."
Yeah.
But
I also don't necessarily think that clients often, like, they know what they're doing, but they don't really realize the extent of what they're doing. Right. And I think you're like as soon as demo hits, there's that moment where it's like, there's a 35-foot hole in the ground right here, and they're like, oh, I get it, and like,
there's no going
they don't
back.
necessarily need to be in the weeds, right? Yeah, there's no going back. There it is. Yeah. Like, we're doing this new construction project right now, and we're sectionally pouring foundation. So we're digging these 35-foot deep pits, right? And there's a guy in these 35-foot deep pits trying to form up rebar. And the client walked through the other day and he just was like blown away. He was like, I had no idea like that this is how this happens, you know, that someone's literally going to be in this hole 35 feet down, tying rebar and pouring concrete. And we're like, yeah, it's pretty intense. And again, we do it this way because we're building lot line to lot line. We're building, you know, against adjoining foundations, and we're trying to be safe. We can't just completely excavate out a, you know, hillside.
Yeah.
And so these clients really are just like, wow.
I think, the intensity, like you mentioned, like the physicality of it, like the reality of it, it becomes much more tangible. Because even when during design you show renderings and maybe some walkthroughs and stuff, it's not I don't know.
There is a million steps in order for that to actually happen in real life. And when we do our presentation, we go from step 0 to step 100.
That's true.
But everything that's in between, like, clients have no idea. Like, how
there's old house and then new house. See, it's easy.
Before, after, you know?
That's basically what it is. But you're right, though. Your kind of favorite moment in the construction of when insulation gets put in it. That's a really good observation, because prior to that, like you said, it's just framing, but you don't sense the space at all.
Yeah.
Because it's echoey and all the stuff that you mentioned.
Yeah, and you know, I can still like go back to like the first time that happened, and like you literally you walk into the space and everything gets quiet, right? And then that sound, that's the lack of sound is super interesting the first time you see it or you hear it, for that matter. So yeah.
Have you ever been surprised by, you know, like looking at the plans that maybe the architect did and being like thinking, oh, I'm not so sure how this space is going to feel like. And then you built it and either your thought is confirmed, it doesn't feel very good, or you're like, oh, actually, you know what? That's pretty good.
I do a good job of keeping my mouth shut when appropriate. I mean, there's always, when you've done this long enough, you always have a comment necessarily like in your mind, like, oh, I don't really like that. I don't like how that looks. Or, you know, you know, when the time is right to voice your opinion. I try to, you know, continue to teach our staff that it's really, we're the builder and we have a spot in this world of building. And you are the architect and designer, right? And we have to believe in the vision that you guys are creating. We're only here to help support that vision. Just because I don't like how a floor transition is going into a staircase or whatever. Like the ultimate decisions lies with the homeowner and the architect. And if that's the vision, then we're going to build it. But first, you know, every once in a while you're like, I could do better.
So you're never like, well, I do have a background in design and art, so let me give you my opinion of this.
But it's a tricky thing because I feel like sometimes architects and designers could benefit from maybe hearing some ideas coming from contractors on how to maybe do things a little bit better.
You mean for the end product reason or how to get there? Yeah,
and it's kind of a tricky conversation because, you know, as the architect, you don't really want to hear from anybody on site, like how you should be designing, right? But in the same time, I think as the builder, you should feel free somehow to be able to suggest these ideas in order to make everything better.
I can feel the architects listening, pulling their hair and going, what are you saying right now?
What are you saying?
No, but it's a teamwork, and we're not experts in building things, so I think more dialogue.
I think the best builds are the ones that people are super collaborative on. Not that I'm going to tell you that wall shouldn't go there, but you know, we've interacted with different architects and different designs. Like let's talk about a waterproofing detail, right? Like don't try to like come up with that yourselves. Like let us help you. Yeah. Or you know, oh, we have a tricky, like how do we make these transitions work? Like of course we'd love to collaborate and be a help to the process, not hinder the process or steal a design that you guys, architects or designers, are super interested in achieving. I think our role is to just say, hey, like, have you thought about how to build it this way? Or here's this product, right? We're very, there's a lot of cutting edge products out there that like maybe you guys don't know about, or maybe we don't know about, and you're teaching us. I think that's exciting, the learning process and being able to collaborate in a constructive way where we're not, I'll say, stepping on an
Yeah.
architect's or designer's toes, but that we're helping to just make a better end result product. I think that's always super exciting.
Are you guys doing like pre-construction services as part of what you offer to clients?
We do, and I think that's hands down some of the best money that clients can spend. I think oftentimes people don't necessarily think that the builder needs to be a part of this process, at least in the early stages. But the most successful projects are run when the builder is brought in early. They're a trusted partner. They get to sit in some of these design meetings. If I were to ask 10 clients or potential clients, like, who, like, what do they think of their builder? Like, typically the builder's brought in too late and they end up becoming like the dream, well, we'll say is the dream killer, or, when they've spent all of this time in design, but they haven't checked it to what things are going to cost, right? So make smart decisions early on that fit within your budget and design so that you can finish or get into construction with a set of drawings that one, you can afford, and two, like encompasses all of the things that you want. It's not expensive. You get a great opportunity to know who your builder is, know who your construction team's going to be, so that you're not learning along, in construction, the flaws that they may have.
Yeah.
And I like pre-construction all day. I think it's hard because the model of hiring a GC is you send out the drawings once they've been created to 3 contractors, and you pick based on budget.
Yeah.
Maybe a few other aspects, right? But ultimately it comes down to the budget, and it's just an old way of going into construction, especially with costs being outrageous right now.
Yeah.
Better to know early.
Yeah, we agree for sure with everything you're saying. Even going back to the architect and contractor having more dialogue with each other, and it even goes back early in the conversation about just being interested in learning. I mean, honestly, that's like one of the most interesting and fun parts for us as a small office, is the ability and the chance to get to work with people and ask them a ton of questions and say, do you have a better way of doing this? Because when we're talking about, specifically, let's say construction details and other things in a project, like, we're not the ones making it, like you guys are. And like, there's 100% some knowledge that you guys have that we don't. And why wouldn't we want to hear from the boots on the ground, the people who are assembling it, or people who have way more experience than us, and say, we've done this detail the last 10 years and we've seen it fail. So therefore we propose this or whatever. Okay, that's fantastic. And that extends to pre-construction, for sure. I've always wondered with pre-construction, because we're big believers in it as well, that clearly the hesitance, the reason why clients are hesitant to hire a contractor to do pre-construction, is that they miss out on the bidding process. They miss out on a good deal. They miss out on not even a good deal, which sounds kind of salesy, but miss out on being able to interview different contractors and kind of test them. And I don't know if you have an answer to this, but I guess I've been wondering, like, is there a way to do pre-construction for the sake of the project, but somehow the client still has the ability to not bid out the project, but interview different contractors, or get the feeling that they are, making a good choice and not being pigeonholed to, this is the one contractor, that's it. There's no conversation from day zero. This is the one.
Yeah, I would tell clients that by no means is getting into a pre-construction contract with a contractor to have ample knowledge of how to build a home, a contract to get into construction
Mm.
with that contractor. Those are two separate contracts. I think the ability, the success of bringing a contractor in early, getting to know them, getting them to help weigh in on costs far exceeds the concern or the concern of not being able to go through that kind of typical process later on. I think what
Hmm.
you'll find most of the time is if you have a good partner that's open and honest, that's talking to you about the costs up front, that's sharing that information with you, um, and that's building a relationship with you through pre-construction, you're only going to find that you don't want to bid it out to anyone else, that you trust that they're giving you the answers that you want, or the pricing that you prefer. I think there's a process. There's it's just it's just giving you a great opportunity to get to know your contractor. And then if if through this whole process you're like, oh, I still want to test the waters, you have every opportunity to do that.
Mm. That's super well said. I also think that, as you were talking just now, that if you find a contractor who really believes in pre-construction, and they do operate that way, and they do pre-construction properly, meaning they have the cost breakdowns and they're transparent, all the things you mentioned, that that in itself is an interviewing process. Like it'd be very tough to find a crappy contractor who's going to do that, because the ones who bid low and
Absolutely.
get the projects, they don't do that kind of work anyway. So it's sort of, I guess I'm thinking out loud, it's sort of kind of like, it is an interview process. Like if you have a contractor who does that, then the chances of them being good at the rest of it are, I would say, much higher.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm a homeowner and I'm hiring on a contractor through pre-construction, I'm looking less at necessarily like the cost that he's providing, but I'm looking more at how they're staying organized,
Mm.
how they're keeping up with their tasks on this team, how what their communication is like. I'm the contractors in an interview for the length of pre-construction,
Mm.
right? That's all that is an interview process, and you're getting typically months of getting to know them, getting to interview them, um, that you wouldn't get if you went the traditional route of just picking three GCs.
Yeah. And I think the other point you brought up is that if you work with someone through pre-construction and they're giving all that information, helping you, and in the end they decide I'm going to go with someone else, and assuming they're going to go with someone else who's at a who's comparable, someone who's also very high tier or whatever else, it's not like the work that the first contractor did is wasted information. It's absolutely not, because we tend to see that for architects, for contractors and architects, that at a certain kind of tier, let's say, everyone everyone's pretty good, and usually their price ranges are also pretty close to each other. There's a few outliers, and it becomes more of a personality thing. So anyway, that's a long way of saying I think that even if in the end you don't go with a contractor, it's not like you just wasted all that money. You still gain something from it.
Absolutely. I think I'll oftentimes have a proposal, and I'll literally take a proposal if we're trying to compare like-minded contractors, and I'll fold the proposal down to all that you see is the bottom line costs and the division one fees, because everything else in the really doesn't matter. If you're trying to compare one contractor to the next, and they're all around the same playing field. They manage projects with superintendents and and project managers. They have a small staff. Like if you're putting them all on the same board, really, the only difference really should be how they're managing a project and what they're charging at the bottom, the markup, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're getting. Obviously, there's a lot of emotion and liking a contractor, but if you're trying to compare three contractors together, really compare that top division and the bottom, because that's what's going to tell you what's different about those contractors in terms of how they run a project and their cost structure. um, sure, they may have a cheap plumber that's 10% less than the plumber that I found, right?
Right.
Or, their floor, they have a connection with a flooring sub, right? Like there might be those nominal differences, but I think if you're trying to just compare the GC with another GC, that's kind of the overall, that's the easiest way to compare.
Yeah, that's well said. That makes a lot of sense. I was curious also, for you guys, this is my favorite questions to ask contractors. Is there a minimum project size that you guys would take on? In other words, does this project have to be a certain scale or size and et cetera, before you would consider it?
No, what I would say is that there's a minimum buy-in to hiring a contractor like Cook Construction, which is you have to want a certain level of management and want to afford that level of management. If you're installing a kitchen, like if you just are doing a kitchen, oftentimes clients don't want, half of their fee to just be the overall management of the kitchen, right? Most of the time clients will say, oh, well, that was my whole kitchen budget, and I think it's wanting the level of oversight that we provide, the documentation, the OAC meetings, the timelines, us managing a budget properly, the overall care that we put into a home in order to return it back to the homeowner. So I think there's not necessarily an initial price point. It's whether they do care about the level of management that they're receiving. And if they can get over what those fees are, I think, we'll take on anything. Right now we're helping a client that's doing a kitchen and 2 bathrooms, but they want to be back on the East Coast all summer. They don't want to have to manage it. They don't want to manage the design team or, the architects. And they don't really want to know about the construction. They trust their people, and they realize that like there's a level of management that they have to buy into in order to make that happen. And so they're comfortable with us doing that project.
Right. That makes sense. What is the most challenging part of your job? I guess there's 2 ways to phrase that question. One, as a GC, as a GC in general, and then 2, maybe as a business owner who has an operation of 20 people and is as successful like you are. And maybe they're different answers. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess, let me think. The hardest part about being a GC, managing expectations. I think it's not necessarily client expectations. Sometimes it's the architect's expectations. Sometimes it's your neighbor's expectations. I think every project is presenting a different level of challenges. And so being adaptive to each one of those challenges and being successful at each one of those is always probably the most challenging piece that we do really well, but it is still a challenge every day. As a business owner, I think the most stressful part is just we have 20 mouths to feed. We have 20 families to feed. Being able to feel confident that we want to keep our employees forever, and making sure that they always have enough work is important. So we don't always take on all of the perfect jobs for what we do, but sometimes we take it on because we care about the employees that work for us, and we want to make sure that they can go home to their families every week knowing that they have a job, and 2, that it's with us. So I think that's the most challenging part is just kind of thinking about it every day and making sure that everything that we're doing is in the best interest of our employees.
Yeah. And I've said it many times on the show before, but still, it that's a massive responsibility. And the interesting thing with what you guys do, because it's physical labor, people are building things, that if there's not a project, then there's nothing for that person to do. It's very like off and on, whereas maybe other industries and other things people do, there's a little more squish room. There's like, you can kind of, this person can go fix the CAD library or like whatever it is. I don't know. But in your case, it's either they're building the thing or they're not building the thing. It's very kind of black and white.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's 100% my responsibility to continue to build and foster relationships in the industry so that there's a consistent influx of potential projects even, right? So it's making good connections and then being able to find the act and being able to be awarded projects and keeping that consistent day in and day out and not fall off that, because like it's super easy to just get like like absorbed into just the current projects that are going on, right?
Mm.
Like they're super exciting. I love building, but once you start to have, a fairly large staff, like those those priorities, I guess you'd say, have to shift and they have to focus on the things that matter for the business itself. Um, and so then you start to have to get into business development and client relations and all of the fun stuff.
And being on podcasts.
Do you ever miss doing the physical construction yourself? Back when you were a carpenter and things like that, or the rowing even? Because it sounds like you're a pretty heavy rower, and I sometimes feel like that when people are basically athletes, when that disappears, it's an odd transition.
I wouldn't say I miss it because I still get an opportunity to do it from time to time.
Wait, sorry, I
But I
compounded
don't do
questions. Could you get a chance to do the rowing or the construction?
it. Both
Oh,
actually.
cool.
But far less the rowing than the construction, but still far less construction as well. I I do miss it. I get to pick up the hammer from time to time. I've got plenty of projects that I do on my own at home to work on my house. But more so than anything is that I actually enjoy going to a site and swinging a hammer with our crew from time to time because it gives them a sense that like it's where I came from. It's what I used to do. And I can still do it. So I think there's a level of visibility there. Not that, I want my clients to think that I'm swinging a hammer every day, but I do think it helps with team morale to say like, hey, I'm telling you to do this because I know what I'm telling you to do. And I've lived in that world. So when I do get the opportunity to kind of get back into it, it's exciting, but I don't necessarily miss it on a day to day.
Sure. Sure. The other question I have is, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that clients or architects, basically anyone who's not a contractor, misconceptions they have about what you do?
What we do as a firm or what I do as an individual?
Good question. Both. I want
Uh,
both.
I knew you were going to absorb both of those into us.
Yeah, I think maybe broadly, like what misconception people have of general contractors or builders.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily say it's a misconception. I think that oftentimes the MO that builders get are that they're crooked or they're just trying to make a bunch of money off of you. And I think that's actually not the case for good, like-minded contractors that are kind of at our tier. Not to say that it's not out there. I think we go above and beyond trying to be transparent with our clients. We sign contracts that say so. We try to, we take blame as soon as something happens. We try to be the most honest contractor that you're going to get so that you can start to change the minds of other people, right? That not every contractor is trying to swindle you, right? In many cases, we're doing the exact opposite. And I think, that's definitely transitioning. That's definitely changing. I think you'll find that as like people stop triple bidding or quadruple bidding projects that like not everyone is out to get your money. Construction is really expensive. But it's not expensive in terms of trying to swindle you out of the money. It just is expensive here in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Um, As for misconceptions of me personally as a business owner, um, and I have to think about that a bit more. I'm not exactly sure. I feel like I come across as pretty genuine and honest.
Yeah, I think it's a fair answer because you're obviously we know you. You're pretty straightforward and chill. So there's if anyone who knows you, it's like there's not much to
Not much ego.
misconstrue here.
Yeah, the one thing I love to do is talk about myself every day and day and out.
There's a lot of people who do that out there, you know.
Well, that's
Yeah.
like it's good quality to have if you're going to be a guest on a show. It's
Yeah.
not a good quality if it's not good when people don't have that quality.
Yeah.
I was wondering if there is anything that you think architects can do to be better, like be better at our job, be better with, you know, relationship with
Ooh.
contractors. Like, is there something,
You don't have to
you know,
name specific architects, but just
but you
broadly
can if you
speaking.
want. It's it's up to you.
I yeah, I would just I would say be an advocate for the GC.
Mhm.
Be, and I'm not saying I've met anyone that does this. I'm just saying that if this is my hopes and dreams is be an advocate for the GC. Um, don't give false expectations to what a project is going to cost. Um,
That's a good one.
maybe
Yeah.
ask a GC. Um, and yeah, more so than anything, just continue to be knowledgeable about what, even if it's just the square foot pricing for what construction is today. I think it's best to let that be the contractor's role,
Yeah.
because I think that oftentimes clients are teed up in their mind as to what this process is going to cost, and then they've come to the GC far later in the game and they realize that that's not the case. And we often are the ones that bear the wrath
Yeah.
of that image.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tricky one because clients always want to know, oh, how much is it gonna be? And we're always like, look, we're not that familiar with like what the current prices are or how things get priced. That's not our expertise.
Also, like it's impossible. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, but it's like I can't tell you that until we've done at least some kind of preliminary something. And a lot of times, especially with remodel
Absolutely.
work, it's like I don't even know what your scope is. Like you're
No,
fluctuating
absolutely. Yeah.
between.
And it's constantly changing as you're developing design, right?
Yeah.
So like what you may have had an initial meeting with in order to get hired with that client might not be the design that you're coming up with at the end of your schematic or even, CD set of drawings. So it's really challenging to design to a budget when it's such an artistic piece of work that you're working on yourself, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
knowing the client is step one, but like I don't know, it's just really I can't even imagine being able to say like design within a a box and only design with what like the cost is for this box, because it kind of takes away some really artistic freedom.
It's an odd thing. I mean, one of the ways that we describe we talk about this with clients is it's kind of like three steps forward and two steps back is what's going to happen throughout a designing for sure. And then the CDs, less so CDs, but more the design. And that's just the nature of it. And there's for many reasons. One is the cost, because again, you can't price something if you don't know what the heck it is. And then also even just
Yep.
for the design and for what the client wants as the end result, all clients have an idea of what they want in their kind of theoretical concept mind space, but it's very, very different once they see it on paper, right? And it takes three steps forward to be able to show anything that's worth showing. And then there's a conversation, and then you got to go
Yep.
backward and say, okay, of the three options, this is the one that seemed to be the most leading. Let's rework it or produce another three options that are completely different. So it's not it trial and error sounds too loose of a phrase, but it is sort of like that. It's an iterative, as architects love to say, it's an iterative process. And and that kind of mindset applies also to things like budget. It's and I can
Yeah,
understand for clients, it's an uneasy feeling to have sometimes because they're mostly used to like I buy my car online with the click of a button now. Why can't it be that for a custom home? It's like, nah, it's unlikely the case.
yeah. I mean, you could buy a turnkey home somewhere and kind of resolve a lot of those issues. But like, if you're hiring an architect, enjoy the process, right? I mean, it's you have your phases of design just as we have our phases of construction, right? And you go through this and you've learned this process with like on purpose, right? Like you do these things so that you can slowly get the clients to like approve and like where their process is going, like schematic designs. You said it exactly. Like you would say, here's three different options, what do you think of these? And I'm sure you guys nail it on the first one, so you don't have to worry about the other two ever. But like that's part of the process, right? Like
Yeah.
is slowly getting them, getting an understanding of them, understanding of their image in their brain of what their house is going to look like, right? And then being able to then continue to design further and further, right? Like you don't start with a CD set of drawings, right? So
No, good Lord, no. I was also wondering, like during construction, is there any one thing, and maybe it's a phase or a particular moment or whatever else that um that you see clients are most surprised by? Because obviously most clients are new to the process. A lot of them maybe perhaps have not gone through it before, and maybe there's a whole list of things actually now that I think about it. But is there anything that you know clients are mostly surprised by when you get into it or once you go finish with the whole thing?
I mean, there could be a thousand different things that clients are surprised by. I think it's like a bell curve of excitement in a client's,
Hmm.
like it kind of it there's like a maybe it's not a bell curve, but it's there's a level of which where like it's super exciting off the start because like now things are happening, and then you hit a point where like you get to drywall and they start to see the walls. And I often remind people at that very time, like we're only halfway through the project. Like
Yeah.
drywall is up, now we're halfway there, and it's so hard. They're like, in their minds, they immediately, and if you don't educate them on this, they'll immediately be like, oh, like two months left, and we're almost there. And I'm like,
Yeah.
this is the moment at which we really do all of the visual hardworking stuff, right?
Hmm.
And making things look perfect. But they often get to the drywall phase and they're like, you know, like now we're done, we're there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
Like, yeah, sure,
um,
if you like
so I,
drywall, yeah.
yeah.
exactly. Yes. Yes. If we could be done right now, this will make it a lot easier on us. Punch list will be easy. But yeah, I think just getting to that point, landing, landing the understanding that like there's still like a half a project left here.
That's a really interesting thing because a very similar thing happens during the design phases. So once we get through schematic design, where we have, and schematic design means different things for different offices for sure. But let's say there's strong 3D imagery of the house, so the clients have seen what
Mhm.
it's supposedly going to be like. They kind of assume that okay, that's the peak of that curve that you were mentioning, and they think that okay, DD and CDs, like we're very close, right? Like we can start building because I've seen it in the computer or on a print or whatever. It looks done. Let's go. You're like, no, it's like a halfway point or not even actually. It's like there's still like a lot of decisions to be made, and I don't have to think about this more, but it's very very parallel to like a schematic. Like I would say,
Yeah.
describe drywall as kind of like a schematic level of the final house in a sense.
Yeah. And, I've had too many conversations with clients, where, they don't understand why, the contractor can't build off of a set of drawings or the permit set of drawings, right? There's
Oh man, yeah.
so much more that go into an actual construction document than what's presented to get a building permit off of, right?
Mhm.
And it's almost comical at this point because people don't realize like clients wouldn't typically realize the difference between a pricing set and a construction document, right? They would assume like I got pricing based off of this pricing set. So doesn't that mean it's now the contractor's turn to deliver this finished product? Like we don't need the architect anymore. But obviously it's not the case, and I can only imagine like those conversations on your end with clients being like, okay, like this is what CDs look like, or this is what like this is a pricing set. This is what the contractor's not getting, right?
Yeah.
And educate them through that piece.
Yep. We hear and see that pretty often, and it takes a little bit of education.
Last question.
And getting them to.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say getting them to like understand and like be excited about all of the details. Like the details are not necessarily easily understood by people that aren't in the industry, right? And so oftentimes it's tough to understand why we as builders need them if we didn't use those for pricing. So
interesting.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Final question is, what is next for you guys? I think you mentioned before we hit record that you're having a new office being finished up.
Finished is a big stretch, yes. So it's new. We just started a TI on our future home, which we're super excited about. It's a 6,500 square foot industrial building in San Rafael.
Wow.
It's, I think, exciting. It's exciting because we get to have a place that we call home for a long period of time, for the foreseeable future. It's a space that we get to completely design ourselves and get to look to the future a little bit, right? So we're looking at this space more so than just an office space, but an entertaining space. We're looking at this space as a place to grow. We still have a lot of aspirations to be a larger firm, not necessarily like larger in terms of staff, but larger in terms of our visibility. The space is also something. So going back to our very beginning of our conversation, I do have a very big and large artistic background, and the purchase of this space is part of this space is actually going to be what I'll call my tinker shop for right now, for a lack of a better term. But it's going to be able to give us the flexibility to help spin off and do one-off custom pieces for homes to help kind of up that bar in terms of what we can provide in terms of a service, as well as it gives me an opportunity to be more artistic.
Oh, cool.
And so that's super exciting.
Super exciting.
That's awesome. Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with us. This was a lot of fun. Hopefully this provided a sort of a respite from the chaos of all the things you have going on. But the conversation was great, and
Absolutely.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you both for your time.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please support our show by hitting that subscribe button and liking and commenting on our videos.
You can also find us on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're mostly on Instagram. And you can reach out to the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can send a text message or leave a voicemail. If you have any reaction to this recording, any questions you might have, or guest suggestion, feel free to send it our way.
Cool. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.
Thanks. Bye-bye.